Hello, I'm Tanner Barlow. The night my stepfather threw my mother out, he looked at me and said, "Take your worthless life and go live on the streets." Then he looked at her and said, "Rot there, old woman." We walked out with almost nothing, and he thought he'd won. What he didn't know was that the house, the business, and every shiny thing he kept were drowning in debt. And before this was over, the same man who slammed that door on us would be begging at mine. "Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there." Then I opened the front door and knew something was wrong. I knew something was wrong before I opened the front door. Some houses tell on themselves. Ours did. The place looked polished from the street, all stone trim and warm lights, and a wide front window that made people think stability lived there. But the second I stepped inside, the air felt staged, too still, too clean, like somebody had cleared the room for a performance. The kitchen table gave it away. Trey Whitlock had lined up papers in neat stacks across the wood, each pile squared off with the kind of care men use when they want control to look like order. Deed copies, vehicle titles, business records, bank statements, legal forms. He had spread them out the way some people lay out framed family photos. Like these were the real heirs in the room. The overhead vent hummed above us. My mother sat at the far side of the table, hands folded so tightly in her lap I could see the strain in her wrists. She had changed clothes after work, but not fully. Her cardigan was still on. Her purse was still near her chair. It looked less like she had sat down for a conversation and more like she had been told not to leave. Trey sat at the head of the table in a pressed button-down, one sleeve slightly creased where he had rolled it and rolled it back. He tapped one folder with two fingers. Just once, then again, like ownership could be confirmed by rhythm. "You're late," he said. "I came from work. You might want to pay attention tonight." That was Trey. No raised voice at first. No scene if a colder tone would do the job. He believed calm made him look righteous. I stayed standing for a second, taking in the stacks. There was one document too many in the property file. A second lien disclosure clipped behind a refinance summary. He either thought nobody would notice, or he had stopped caring who did. I moved closer, but not too close. That had always been my place in his house. Near enough to hear everything. Far enough to be reminded none of it belonged to me. My mother looked up once. Not a plea, not yet. Just weariness. Trey slid a packet toward himself, then another, then one more. He did not say our names right away. He said the house, he said the business, he said the vehicles, he said the accounts. Every sentence stripped the people out and left only the assets. "I built this life," he said. "I'm not going to let a divorce turn into a liquidation." My mother finally spoke. Nobody said liquidation. He did not look at her when he answered. "Let's not pretend you understand how any of this works." The scrape of paper across wood sounded louder than it should have. I felt heat crawl up my neck, but I kept my mouth shut. Being underestimated teaches you things. It teaches you who gets reckless when they think no one in the room can read what they're hiding. Trey reached for another folder and left a thin envelope in front of my mother. Personal papers. That was all. No room for argument, no room for history. 15 years of her life in that house, and he was reducing her to a forwarding packet. He looked over at me then, finally giving me the kind of attention a man gives a stain on a shirt. "This part doesn't concern you." I smiled without meaning to. Not because anything was funny, because that line was so familiar it almost belonged on the walls. My whole life with him had been one long version of that sentence. "Sit down, stay out of it. You don't know enough. Let the adults handle it." I said, "If my mother's in it, it concerns me." That did it. Something shifted in his face. Not surprise, offense, the deep kind that comes from a man who thinks the wrong person spoke at the wrong time. He leaned back in his chair and looked at me like he was measuring whether I was worth the effort of contempt. "You know what your problem is, Tanner?" I did not answer. "You walk around acting like you see things other people miss, like you're smarter than everybody in the room." He let out a dry laugh. "You're not. You never were." My mother straightened. "Trey." But now he was looking right at me, and the polished voice was gone. Take your worthless life and go live on the streets. The words hit hard not because he shouted them, but because he meant them, cleanly, completely. Like he had been saving them. For one quick second, my body moved before my judgment did. My shoulders locked, my hands curled. I could already feel what it would take to drag him out of that chair. But right behind that came the other thought, the one that mattered more. If I gave him the scene he wanted, my mother would be the one standing in the wreckage. So I stayed where I was. I looked at the stacks again, the house papers, the business debt he thought looked like leverage, the liabilities tucked into the edges of his confidence. Trey still believed he was gathering wealth under his hands. He had no idea he was pulling a collapse closer. My mother drew in a slow breath. Trey turned toward her, and when he did, I understood the ugliest part of the night had not happened yet. He was not done humiliating us. The worst words of that night were the ones he saved for my mother. He turned toward my mother so slowly it almost felt polite. That was the part people never understood about Trey. He did not always come at you with noise. Sometimes he used that steady, measured voice that made everything sound final before it sounded cruel. He rose from his chair, straightened one stack of papers with the edge of his hand, and looked at Wendy like she was already something he had boxed up in his mind. She stood near the end of the table, with her purse hanging from one shoulder, cardigan still buttoned, like some part of her had known this night would not end with anyone sitting back down for dinner. When a marriage runs its course, Trey said, grown people handle it with dignity. I almost laughed at that, but nothing in me was light enough. My mother answered quietly, dignity goes both ways. His mouth tightened. Not enough for a stranger to notice. Enough for me. You should be careful using words like that. The room had gone strange by then. The air conditioner kept running, but the house felt closed off, like the walls were listening. The lamp in the front hallway threw a soft yellow wash across the entry, and in it, my mother looked suddenly older. Not weak, just worn down in a way I had not let myself fully see until that second. Trey stepped back from the table and pointed toward the foyer. Take your papers and go. My mother did not move. He gave her a long, hard look. Then he said the thing I knew I would hear in my head for years. Rot there, old woman. It landed harder than what he had said to me. I felt my jaw lock so tight I could hear my own pulse. My mother's fingers closed around the handle of her bag until her knuckles went pale. She blinked once. After that, she did not blink again for several seconds. She did not argue. She did not ask him how he could say something like that after all those years. At her age, humiliation changes shape. It is not just about being insulted. It is about being told your usefulness is over, that your time has already spent itself. Every part of me wanted to put him through the wall, and every part of me knew that if I did, Trey would call the sheriff, call me unstable, call my mother a burden with a violent son. He would turn one ugly sentence into a whole new story, and he would tell it for the rest of his life. So I held still. That kind of stillness costs something. People think restraint is passive because they have never had to use it while their blood was running hot. Mine was. My mother turned her head just enough to look at me. It was not dramatic. No tears, no shaking mouth. Just one look. We had lived in that house under the same man long enough to know what silence meant. Do not give him more. Do not make this uglier. Get me out. I crossed the space between us, took her hand and felt how cold it was. Trey let out a short breath through his nose. That's right. Walk away. That's all either of you know how to do. I did not answer him. My mother did not either. We moved through the hallway together, past the framed photos he had always placed to make the house look more loving than it was, past the polished console table, past the front door with the brushed brass lock he had insisted on installing himself, because he liked saying a man ought to secure his own home. Funny thing was, he had never secured anything. He had just financed it. I opened the door. Evening air hit my face, warmer than the air inside, but easier to breathe. The porch light had already come on, throwing a pale circle across the concrete. My mother stepped out first. I stayed half a second longer, just enough to make sure she had her footing. Then I heard it. Click. He had locked the door behind us before we even reached the steps. That sound did something to me. Not because it surprised me, because it made everything official. We had not just left an argument. We had been shut out of a life my mother had spent years holding together. We went down the walkway slowly. She was still holding my hand. I do not think either of us noticed until we reached the driveway. Her car was gone. Mine was still there under the security light, dust along the hood, coffee cup in the console, a receipt on the passenger seat from gas I had bought that morning. Ordinary things. They looked almost absurd in that moment. A normal life was still sitting inside that car while ours had just been cut open behind us. My mother let go of my hand and drew in one careful breath. "I'm sorry," she said. I shook my head. "No." I opened the passenger door for her. She lowered herself into the seat with more care than usual, setting her purse in her lap like she was afraid even that might be taken if she looked away. I closed her door and stood there one moment longer, looking back at the house. From the street, it still looked solid. Good roof line, nice stonework, fresh mulch in the front beds. A place people would drive past and assume belonged to somebody successful. But by the time I got behind the wheel, I already knew Trey had not taken a fortune. He had taken a ticking collapse. I pulled out of that driveway without looking in the rearview mirror again. There are moments when anger wants the wheel, but anger is reckless and gas tanks are not bottomless. Mine was already low. The warning light had been glowing since late afternoon, and now it sat there on the dash like one more thing I did not have room to ignore. My mother was quiet beside me, one hand resting over her purse, the other curled loosely in her lap. I could hear her breathing. I could hear the turn signal when I hit the corner. I could hear my phone buzz once in the console and then go still. That was the part nobody tells you about nights like that. After the big insult, after the slam door, after the line you know you will hear in your head for years, real life keeps asking practical questions. Where are you sleeping? Do you have enough gas? Did she bring her medication? How much can you cover before this turns from humiliation into emergency? I drove us toward a duplex a coworker had mentioned a few months earlier. Week-to-week place. Not fancy, but clean enough, he had said. The kind of place people use when they are waiting for their life to turn back into itself. I had saved the number in my phone and never expected to need it. The landlord answered on the third ring. I kept my voice level. Asked if the unit was still open. It was. Cash deposit. First week up front. I said I could be there in 20 minutes. When we got there, the porch light was on, and one thin curtain moved in the air from a rattling window unit. The place smelled faintly of old carpet cleaner and stale heat when I opened the door. The kitchen was barely a kitchen, a short strip of counter, a folding table with two chairs that did not match, a cheap coffee maker in the corner, one narrow hallway leading to a bedroom and a bathroom small enough that the towel bar nearly touched the sink. My mother stepped inside and looked around like she was trying to be gracious to a place that had done nothing wrong. "It's fine," she said. "People say that when they need the person next to them to survive the next 10 minutes. There was a paper grocery sack on the counter from whoever had stocked a few basics before we came in. Bread, peanut butter, store-brand coffee." My mother set her purse down beside it carefully, almost like she still expected a wide granite island under her hand instead of cheap laminate. I took the bedroom, gave her the bed, told her I'd make the couch work. She started to protest and stopped halfway through. That told me more than a full speech would have. She was too tired to argue manners. While she washed her face and closed the bathroom door, I stood at the counter and did quiet math in my head. Rent first, food next, her prescriptions, gas, then whatever legal help this was going to require. I checked my banking app, then hers after she gave me the password. 2 cards were already declining. The joint account had been drained lower than it should have been. One autopay had been canceled, another was pending and likely to bounce by morning. That was Trey's real talent, not just cruelty, timing. He did not want us merely gone. He wanted us unsteady, and the truth was, I had smelled trouble long before that night. A few months earlier, I'd come in through the garage and seen a late mortgage notice mixed into ordinary mail on the hall table. Bright print, final reminder language. The kind lenders do not use unless the account has already drifted past temporary. I had picked it up before I could stop myself. Trey came around the corner, saw it in my hand, and laughed. "Look at you. he said. One envelope and suddenly you're a financial expert. It says past due. It says mind your business. Jody had been there too, standing near the kitchen with a glass of iced tea. She gave me that little look people use when they think somebody younger is trying too hard to sound informed. You're always looking for problems, Tanner. I handed the notice over. Trey folded it once, then tossed it on the counter like paper changed character when he touched it. But I work around delinquency files. I look at distress patterns all day. I know the difference between a rough month and structural rot. A man can hide a lot behind polished floors and clean trucks. He cannot hide the smell of strain from somebody who reads default language for a living. Back in the duplex, my mother came out of the bathroom without her lipstick on. That hit me harder than I expected. Not because makeup mattered, because she had not forgotten it at home. Trey had forced the kind of leaving where a woman does not even get to gather herself with the ordinary things that make her feel like herself. Do you have your blood pressure medicine? I asked. She looked down into her purse and then back up at me. I have 3 pills left. That settled the order of the next morning. I did not sit down much that night. I plugged in my phone, wrote down what was already slipping, checked what accounts were still open, moved the little money she had left access to before anything else got frozen. Not much, enough to buy time if I used it right. The word Trey had thrown at me still moved around in my head, trying to find a place to settle. Worthless. Funny thing about words like that, they only work if they meet an old bruise. Mine did, but pain does not cancel competence. It just makes it work under pressure. By the time my mother finally lay down in that room that smelled nothing like home, I knew 2 things for certain. I had seen signs of Trey's debt before, and if I did not move fast, humiliation would do what debt alone could not. It would wear my mother down until going back started to sound easier than staying gone. While my mother was trying to sleep in a room that smelled nothing like home, Trey was already celebrating the house he didn't realize was sinking. The next few mornings settled into a rhythm neither of us wanted, but both of us understood. I got up first because that is what you do when there is not enough room for grief and routine at the same time. The duplex kitchen was barely wide enough for one person to turn around without brushing a cabinet. The refrigerator made a tired clicking sound before the motor caught. The little window unit in the living room rattled itself awake every time the room warmed up. Even the lamp beside the couch leaned slightly to one side, the shade crooked enough to catch my eye every time I walked past it. My mother moved carefully in that place. That was what got to me most. Not complaints, not tears, care. She reused the same grocery sack twice because throwing it away felt wasteful. She set out her pills in a neat row near the sink. She lowered herself into the folding chair like she was trying not to ask too much from a piece of furniture that had not promised anything. Once, while I was pouring coffee from that cheap machine on the counter, she asked, "Did you sleep at all?" It was such an ordinary question. That made it worse. "Enough," I said. She nodded like she believed me, and we both let the lie sit there. Whenever the house almost came up, silence moved in first. I would start to say, "Back at," and stop. She would glance toward the window and ask if I thought it might rain. We were both doing the same thing, protecting each other from the shape of what had been lost. I went to the pharmacy that afternoon and bought her refill with my debit card. On the way back, I stopped at a grocery store and stood in the canned goods aisle longer than any man ought to stand over soup. I checked the calculator on my phone, locked the screen when I saw her coming from the other side of the cart, then grabbed the cheaper bread and put the better coffee back. That was the new arithmetic. Medication first, rent next, food after that. Pride had no line item. It just turned up in small places and made everything heavier. By the 4th day, I had to go back to Broken Arrow, not to see Trey, to get the rest of my mother's mail before he found another way to weaponize it, and to collect what personal things were still in the side hall closet. I timed it for late afternoon, figuring he might still be out. I was wrong. I turned onto the street and saw 3 vehicles already parked along the curb. Paper plates, a folding table in the backyard, music drifting through the open patio door. For a moment, I just sat there with the truck idling, one hand on the wheel, looking at the house that had been too large for honesty and somehow still too small for his ego. Trey was in the yard wearing an apron, holding a metal tray in one hand and a drink in the other, like he was hosting some kind of fresh start celebration. A couple of neighbors stood near the fence. Shanti Vale was there too. I knew her from the office holiday party the year before. She was laughing at something he said, one hand resting on the back of a patio chair like she belonged in the frame. Then I heard him. Well, the house stayed with the one person who knew how to keep it standing. He said it with that easy little shrug men use when they want cruelty to pass for truth. I did not get out right away. From where I sat, I could see more than he thought I could. A certified envelope lay on the kitchen counter just past the glass. He had pushed it off to the side, unopened or half-opened, hard to tell from the driveway. His phone lit up on the patio table, buzzed once, and he turned it face down without checking it. A minute later, a tow truck rolled slow past the house, not stopping, just moving through the neighborhood, and I watched Trey's eyes follow it longer than made sense. That was the first real crack I saw in him. Not fear, awareness. Just for a second. Then he smiled too wide at something Shanti said and carried the tray to the grill like a man who believed smoke and laughter could cover any smell. Some men do not want peace. They want witnesses. That thought came to me so clean, it almost felt borrowed from somebody older and wiser than I was. But it fit him too well to belong to anybody else. Trey did not just need to take the house. He needed people to see him taking it. Needed them to nod along and tell themselves the stronger one had won. I waited until he went around the side gate, then crossed fast to the porch. My mother's mail was still in the locked box. I had a key. I grabbed everything, stepped back toward my truck, and caught sight of one more thing through the front window. A county envelope with red print across the top. Final notice language. Not enough to blow the whole thing open, enough to tell me the foundation under his victory was already moving. When I got back to the duplex, my mother was standing at the stove trying to work one burner that ran hot and one that barely lit. The room smelled faintly of onions and canned broth. She looked over when I came in, and for one strange second the image split in my head. Trey in that big backyard flipping meat with a grin on his face. My mother in a narrow kitchen coaxing dinner out of almost nothing. I set the mail on the table and took the pan from her. That burner's uneven. She gave me a tired little smile. I noticed. I did not tell her about the cookout right away. Then I looked at the envelopes in my hand and changed my mind. She deserved the truth more than comfort. He had people over, I said. Her face did not change much. That was another thing age teaches people. How to hold a reaction where it does not show. Of course he did, she said softly. I looked at the certified mail, then back at her. He was not done taking things. He wanted the audience too. And because he needed to be seen winning, he was going to stay reckless longer than a careful man ever would. The first people who told my mother to let it go were not strangers. They were family. They did not come through the door looking cruel. That would have been easier. Cruelty is simple when it arrives wearing the face you expect. What walked into that duplex on the 6th day wore concern, soft voices, and the kind of careful manners people use when they want to say something ugly and still feel decent afterward. Krista Boone brought bakery cookies in a paper box. Jody came 10 minutes later with 2 coffees nobody had asked for. They stood in that little kitchen as if the room itself were making their argument for them. The folding table, the crooked lamp in the next room, the medicine bottle near the sink, the grocery sack my mother had folded neatly and tucked beside the refrigerator because wasting anything now felt reckless. Krista set the box down and smoothed a napkin flat with both hands before she spoke. Wendy, I'm just being honest. There it was. The phrase people use right before honesty stops being a virtue and turns into a weapon. My mother had made coffee in the cheap machine and poured it into mismatched mugs. Jody added cream, stirred slowly, and looked around the rental one time too many. She did not have to say the place was beneath my mother. The glance did that work for her. At your age, Krista said, you should be thinking about stability. My mother lowered her eyes. Not because she agreed, because shame is quick, and it knows old roads. Jody leaned one hip against the counter. Nobody is saying Trey handled it well. That sentence almost impressed me. The way people can wrap surrender in language that sounds balanced. But he still has the house, she continued. He still has the business. He can still provide. Dragging this out won't change what is. I asked, what exactly is? She looked at me with tired patience, the kind reserved for children and men people have already dismissed. Tanner, don't make this worse than it has to be. Worse. That word sat there a while. Krista lifted her cup. Peace matters more than pride. I noticed then how often people say peace when what they mean is compliance. Keep the room quiet. Keep the stronger person comfortable. Keep the tired woman from asking what fairness would have looked like if anyone had wanted it. My mother spoke before I could. It isn't pride. Neither woman answered right away. Jody finally said, then what is it? My mother looked down at her coffee and said nothing. And that silence did more damage than shouting would have. Because I knew exactly what she was fighting. Not Trey, not even them. The exhaustion of being made to feel expensive. If I pushed back too hard, I became the sun tearing the last strips of calm off a weary woman's life. If I stayed quiet, I was helping them walk her back toward the man who had thrown her out. That was the trap. Not courage or comfort. Pain one way, pain the other. Krista broke a cookie in half and said, sometimes you have to let a hard man be a hard man and move on. I said, he told her to rot. Her face changed for just a second, but she recovered fast. And that was wrong. But people say things in anger. He wasn't angry, I said. He was satisfied. Jody exhaled through her nose. You're making this personal. That almost made me smile. After they left, my mother stood at the sink longer than necessary, rinsing cups that were already clean. I let her have the minute. Then I took my laptop to the folding table and pulled up county records, UCC filings, and tax entries I had been circling in pieces since the night we left. I stopped looking for embarrassment. I started looking for spread. That is the difference between a mess and a collapse. A mess stays in one room, a collapse takes walls with it. The first thing I found was a recorded tax lien tied to Trey's business entity. Not rumor, not a late bill. Recorded, public, real. I took a screenshot, saved the PDF, printed the page. Then I cross-checked the business name against a financing statement, equipment exposure, vendor claims, a personal guarantee attached to one renewal. That was the moment the shape changed. If Wendy went back in and signed anything out of fear or fatigue, Trey might still find a way to drag her toward the edge with him. The debt was not just deep, it was branching. I printed everything twice. My mother turned from the sink when she heard the printer going. What is it? I looked at the pages in my hand before I answered. It's worse than I thought. She came to the table and sat down slowly. I pointed to the lien first, then the guarantee. I did not give her a lecture, just the plain version. This isn't just about him living bigger than he can afford, I said. This is the kind of paper that starts reaching. Her hand moved to the edge of the table. Can it reach me? Not if I stay ahead of it. That was the promise. Not dramatic, not complete. Just the truth I could offer. That night, after she went to bed, I stayed up with the documents spread in front of me. The duplex was quiet, except for the rattle of the air unit and the occasional passing car on the road outside. I was more tired than I wanted to admit, tired enough to think dangerous thoughts. Maybe they were right. Maybe ending this mattered more than ending it fairly. Maybe survival was just humiliation with a roof over it. Then I looked at the lien again. No, letting it go would not end it. It would only hide the blast a little longer. That was the week I stopped asking whether Trey was lying and started asking how much damage he could still do before the truth reached daylight. After that, I stopped treating the paperwork like proof of a bad marriage and started treating it like evidence in a controlled collapse. I bought colored tabs at a drugstore on my lunch break. Blue for property records, yellow for business debt, red for anything that could still reach my mother if I missed a step. At night, after work, I spread statements across the folding table in the duplex and built order where Trey had spent years building fog. County filings, HELOC disclosures, vendor balances, tax notices, renewal letters, signature pages. Dates mattered now. Sequences mattered more. The following Thursday, I carried 3 folders into Ashabel's office. She did not waste time pretending to be impressed. That was one reason I trusted her. Her office sat above a small insurance office near downtown Tulsa. Nothing flashy, just good blinds, clean shelves, and a desk that looked like it had held bad news for a long time. She motioned me into the chair across from her and opened the first folder. Colored tabs showed along the edge like warning flags. She flattened one page with her palm, read the same line twice, then looked up. "When did you pull this filing?" "Tuesday night. County clerk's site. I printed it the next morning." "And this lien?" "Recorded 11 months ago. Renewed this spring." She wrote on a legal pad without looking down for long. At the top, she had already written 3 words. "Liabilities follow assets." I sat on the edge of the chair, not because I was nervous, but because my body had forgotten how to rest. Asha kept asking short, exact questions. I answered with dates, balances, signatures, account names. No speeches, no family history, just facts. By the time she reached the last folder, something in her expression changed. Not pity, recognition. "You documented what everyone else ignored," she said. "That matters." It was the first time since this started that anyone had spoken to me like I was not just the angry son in the room. She tapped the packet tied to Trey's business obligations. "If he keeps the assets, he keeps this structure. If Wendy signs the wrong thing out of fear, he may still try to drag exposure back across the line. I can work with this, but I need you to stay disciplined." "I can do disciplined." She gave me a dry look. "No late-night heroics, no confronting him alone, no trying to save money by improvising legal strategy from your truck." I almost smiled. "That's specific, huh? I've been doing this a long time." On the drive back, I felt something new under the exhaustion. Not relief, shape, fear with corners on it, something I could carry without dropping. The trouble was, shape did not make the waiting easier. I kept going to work, kept making calls from parking lots and lunch breaks, kept coming home with grocery bags and copied filings, and the kind of fatigue that sits behind your eyes and makes every doorway feel farther away than it is. Twice that week I missed dinner without meaning to. Once I stood in the duplex kitchen with the refrigerator open, staring at nothing, because for a few seconds I could not remember what I had gone in there for. My mother noticed all of it. She noticed the way I stopped just inside the door before stepping all the way in, the way I rubbed my forehead when I thought she was not looking, the way I checked the rent envelope twice before putting it in the drawer. One evening, I came back from work and heard her on the phone in the bedroom. Her voice was low, careful, too careful. I did not catch every word. I caught enough. "No, I'm not saying I want to make trouble." A pause. "I just don't know how much more of this Tanner should have to carry." I stood in the hallway and closed my eyes. When she came out, she had that look people wear when they have almost done something and are not sure whether to admit it. "There are papers," she said quietly, "the ones he wanted signed. If I just looked at them again." My chest went cold. Not because I was angry, because this was the one thing I had been trying to outrun since the lock clicked behind us. If she went back now in any way, Trey would not just win the paperwork. He would win the story. He would get to say this happened because he was right to push hard. My mother sat down slowly at the table. "I can't keep watching this wear you down." I pulled out the chair across from her, but did not sit right away. For a second, the room felt smaller than it was. The rattle of the window unit, the lamp humming faintly in the corner, the grocery list on the counter, all of it suddenly too thin to hold what was happening. Maybe I had spent so long trying not to fail her that I had turned this into another way to fail her. That thought hit hard because it sounded reasonable. She looked at me then, tired clear through. "Maybe this is enough, Tanner. Maybe peace, even bad peace, is still peace." I finally sat down. There are moments when the next sentence decides more than the law ever will. This was one of them. My mother looked at me that night like she was about to ask permission to give up, and I knew if I answered wrong, Trey would still win. For a few seconds after my mother said it, neither of us moved. The duplex had gone so quiet I could hear the refrigerator motor kick on in the next room. That small mechanical hum filled the space where an answer ought to have been. My mother sat at the edge of the chair, shoulders folding inward, both hands wrapped around a mug that had already gone cold. She did not look dramatic. She looked worn out. That was what made it dangerous. I stayed still on purpose. Any sudden movement would have made it feel like panic, and panic was exactly what Trey had been counting on from the beginning. When I finally spoke, I kept my voice level. He wants us tired enough to come back apologizing. My mother looked up at me then, not quickly, slowly. Like the sentence had reached her before the meaning did. I went on before she could turn it into something softer. This isn't peace, Mom. It's surrender dressed up to look reasonable. He throws us out, strips you down to whatever papers he thinks you deserve, and then waits for you to get worn down enough to walk back and call it compromise. She said nothing. The little clock over the stove gave one dry tick, then another. I'm not asking you to fight for revenge, I said. I'm asking you not to hand yourself back to the man who did this and let him call it proof he was right. That landed. I could see it in her face. Not because she suddenly felt stronger, because she could finally name what had been happening to her. Fatigue had been trying to pass itself off as wisdom. Shame had been trying to pass itself off as peace. She studied me for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression. It was not surprise exactly, more like recognition delayed by years, the kind that arrives when a parent looks at a grown child and realizes life changed while they were busy surviving. You've thought this through, she said quietly. I had to. She lowered her eyes once, then lifted them again. I don't want to be the reason your life gets smaller. I sat across from her and told her the truth cleanly. My life gets smaller if I help him do this. That was the first time I heard the sentence myself, and once I heard it, things started to sharpen. Up to then, I had been running on instinct. Protect her, pay this, print that, call here, hold the line. But that night after she went to bed, I stayed at the folding table with the folders open and began seeing Trey more clearly than I ever had. It was not just the debt, it was vanity. That man did not need ownership the way normal people do. He needed the appearance of control. He needed a driveway with vehicles in it, a backyard with guests, a house that still looked claimed. He needed people to keep believing he was the one holding things together. That was why he had been reckless. He thought image could keep reality in its chair. By morning, I was no longer asking how to survive him. I was asking where he would be least able to lie. Later that day, I went back to Asha Bell's office. Same folders, different posture. She noticed before I said a word. You look less tired, she said. That's generous. It wasn't a compliment. She motioned for the folders. What changed? I handed her the updated packet with the lien record, the business guarantee, and the property summary. I stopped hoping he'd understand what he'd done. That got the faintest reaction out of her. Not a smile, just a slight easing around the eyes. She opened the file, flattened one page with her palm, and scanned the signature blocks. Good, she said. That helps. What does? Clarity. She tapped the signed pages. The strongest evidence is usually the evidence people create for themselves. He signed the structure willingly. He insisted on keeping the assets. He declined caution. That matters. She flipped to the property page. This is not your story against his. This is his story in his own handwriting. That line stayed with me. His story in his own handwriting, for the first time since that night in the kitchen. I felt something leave me. Not the anger, not the memory, just the useless part. The part that still wanted Trey to finally admit what he was. The part that still wanted him to look at me and say I had been worth listening to all along. I was done needing that. I did not need an apology. I did not need approval. I needed my mother clear of the blast radius in the truth position where his performance could not smother it. Asha closed the folder. When the time comes, keep your answers short. Facts hold better than feelings in a room like that. I can do short. I know. That meant more than she probably intended. Back at the duplex that evening, my mother was calmer. Not cheerful, not settled, but no longer leaning toward surrender. She asked whether Asha thought there was a path through it. I told her yes carefully, not easily, but yes. Then I sat at the table again and put everything in the order it needed to be in. Not because I was cornered, because I was choosing the room now. By the time we walked into that final room, Trey still thought he was there to protect what was his. I was there to make sure he finally saw what he had actually taken. The room we walked into that morning had no warmth in it at all. Not cold in temperature, cold in purpose. A long table, hard chairs, water and paper cups nobody touched, blinds half drawn against the late spring glare. The kind of room built for people who think paperwork can settle what pride keeps breaking. Trey came in first with Ronald Kirby at his side, carrying himself like a man attending an inconvenience. Not afraid yet, just annoyed. He still thought this was about keeping control, keeping the house, keeping the story. My mother sat beside me and folded her hands in her lap. She did not fidget. She did not ask questions. Asha Bell opened her binder, nodded once to Ronald, and the review began. Ronald adjusted his glasses and slid the first page across the table. The paper made a soft whisper against the wood. Primary residence, he said. Original mortgage balance, second mortgage, home equity line. Trey tapped one finger on the table, then stopped. Ronald moved to the next sheet. Recorded tax delinquency, business lien, vendor exposure, equipment obligation, personal guarantee attached to renewal terms. The room changed right there. Not loudly, I saw it in Trey's face the moment he stopped looking at the pages and started looking at people instead. That is when he knew numbers were no longer staying where he wanted them. Asha turned one more page. If you insist on retaining the assets, the associated liabilities stay attached. Liabilities follow assets. Trey leaned back. That's not the full picture. Ronald's voice stayed even. Then feel free to correct the filings you signed. That was when Trey made his last move. He turned toward me, not the lawyers. Me. Of course he'd love this, he said. He's been digging through my files for weeks, taking copies, pulling screenshots, poisoning Wendy against me. He wanted this to look worse than it is. My mother's head turned slightly toward me. Not doubt, just impact. Trey kept going, because men like him do not stop when the first lie lands. He used her. That's what this is. He made temporary strain sound like collapse because he wanted me ruined. There it was, the exact wound I had been carrying. For one short second, the room tightened around my throat. All the late nights, the folders, the calls, the fear that maybe somehow trying to save my mother had dragged her through one more kind of pain. Then I did the one thing I had finally learned to do. I did not defend my heart. I defended the facts. Yes, I said. I kept copies. That made Trey blink. I kept my voice flat. You kept signing. No one moved. I looked at the stack in front of Ronald. He took the loans. He renewed the debt. He refused review. He insisted on keeping the assets. Those are his signatures. Those are his choices. Trey opened his mouth, but Asha cut in. Counsel advised a review, she said. Your client declined. Ronald set one final waiver on the table. Trey stared at it and went pale in a way I had never seen before. Not angry pale, drained. He knew that paper. He had signed away the right to pretend nobody warned him. Ronald spoke again, calm as weather. The residence is underwater. The business obligations are cross-pressured. The liens are public. The guarantees are enforceable. This is not retained wealth, Mr. Whitlock. This is retained exposure. I looked at Trey then and gave him the cleanest truth I had. You didn't keep the wealth, I said. You kept the weight. Nobody said anything after that. My mother did not smile. I did not either. The moment was not victory in the way people imagine it. No rush, no cheering, just the sound of one lie after another running out of air. The fallout started fast. Shanti stopped showing up. Jody quit calling. 2 vendors filed demands within days. The house that had looked like a prize from the street became a trap with a lawn. 3 evenings later, just after sunset, someone knocked on the duplex door. My mother opened it first, then stepped back without saying a word. Trey stood on the porch with notices in one hand. His shirt was wrinkled. His eyes looked bruised from lack of sleep. He did not seem smaller because he had changed. He seemed smaller because panic had finally taken up all the room inside him. He looked at me over my mother's shoulder. "I need to understand what's happening," he said. I said nothing. He glanced down at the papers, then lowered himself onto the porch step like his legs no longer fully trusted him. That was the first honest thing I had seen him do in years. "They're saying I'm overleveraged. They're talking about defaults. I need to know how bad this is." The man who had told me to take my worthless life and live on the streets was sitting outside my door asking for the one thing he had always denied I had: judgment, clarity, restraint. I stood there, one hand near the frame, and let the silence hold. He came to my door carrying the wreckage he'd chosen, and for the first time in my life, I got to decide what he was allowed to take from us next. I let him talk just long enough to prove nothing important had changed. Trey sat on the porch step with those folded notices hanging from one tired hand, the porch light catching every new line in his face. He looked older than he had a month earlier, but not wiser. That was the difference. He talked about pressure, deadlines, creditors, misunderstandings. He talked about what was happening to him. He did not talk about my mother. He did not say he was sorry for the kitchen table, for the front door, for the way he had spoken to her like her life had already been used up. He did not say a word about what he had said to me either. Not because he forgot, because he still thought the real emergency was his own discomfort. I kept one hand near the door frame while he spoke. My mother stood a little behind me, not hidden, just no longer placed where his damage landed first. Finally, he looked up and said, "I need help." There was a pause after that, a long one, long enough for him to hear what silence sounded like when it no longer belonged to him. "I can help my mother get clear," I said. "I can tell you to listen to your lawyer, answer every notice, and stop pretending this is temporary. What I will not do is become the exit door for choices you made on purpose." His mouth tightened. "So that's it? That's it?" He stared at me like he still expected one more chance to pull rank, one more moment where I would step back into the role he had assigned me. But some doors only open one time. He got up slowly, papers still in his hand, and walked to his car without another word. After that, the rest happened the way collapses usually do. Not all at once, then all at once enough. People stopped stopping by the house. Jody called my mother with a softer voice and said things like, "I just hate how messy this all became," as if the mess had arrived by weather. Krista sent a text about praying for peace. I read both and felt the same thing I had started feeling about a lot of people by then. Late sympathy is not loyalty. It is just distance with better manners. Shanti disappeared from the picture entirely. A contractor Trey had bragged about knowing filed a demand. The house went from symbol to problem. The story he had tried to tell with it no longer had much of an audience. 3 weeks later, my mother and I moved into a smaller rental across town. One bedroom for her, a den for me, a kitchen that could barely hold two people side by side. But every part of it was honest. No performance, no borrowed shine, just a place with working locks, decent light, and room to breathe. I carried in the one thing my mother had insisted on saving from the old life: her recipe box, scratched wood, bent hinge, cards softened at the corners from years of flour-dusted fingers. Trey would not have seen value in it. That made it priceless. The first evening there, after the last box was inside, I tested the new deadbolt. The lock turned with a clean little click. I stood there for a second longer than I needed to. The sound had changed. The first time it meant we had been shut out. This time it meant nobody was throwing us out. A few days later, I came into the kitchen early and found my mother standing at the counter in her robe, making coffee in a room too small to impress anybody. Morning light had just started filling the window over the sink. She looked up when she heard me. It was the same kind of glance she had given me the night we walked out of Trey's house. Only now it meant something different. Not get me out. Not don't make this worse. Not save me. It meant we made it through. I understood it the same way I had the first time, without needing a single extra word. Justice did not hand us back the years. It did not repair the family members who loved appearances more than truth. It did not erase the sound of Trey's voice in that kitchen. Some injuries do not vanish. They just stop running the house. What we got instead was smaller, quieter, and worth more than what we lost. No more shame at the threshold. No more waiting for someone else to decide whether we belonged. No more confusing square footage with safety. My mother set 2 mugs on the table and looked around that little kitchen as if she was finally standing in a place that asked nothing from her except presence. Then she looked at me again and said, very softly, "We're home."